Hi, Chuck.
Hey, how are you? I'll start my video as well. Wait, let me turn off my virtual background.
Hello.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, I had my
Okay.
mute button on.
Oh, it's okay. How you doing, Catherine?
I'm doing good. So I'm from the League of Women Voters, and I'm
Yeah,
you said to check in early.
yeah. I think that was Aaron. So I think we're co-panelists on this. Let me read this.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good.
Where's everybody dialing in from? Where are people physically located right now?
I am in New York City, Brooklyn to be exact. How about you?
In Brooklyn.
So we're both in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
I'm in. This is reporting live from Jackson Heights, Queens.
Ah. Miracle of technology.
Yeah.
How's everyone doing today?
Okay. How about you?
Oh, pretty good. It's been a busy Friday, but can't complain.
A quick question. Will
Sure.
you move through the slides for us? Since you have that master slideshow or presentation you sent around?
Yeah, well, Trevon will he'll go through the slides, and if like you need him to like go back or sort of like stop, then you could just like let him know like during the presentation.
Okay, sounds good. But to answer your question, doing okay. It's not as wet and kind of miserable as it was yesterday, so that's good.
Yeah, we had 10 minutes of sunshine in Brooklyn.
Is that right?
Yeah, now it's clouding up again.
Maybe it's coming our way.
Yeah, most west to east weather.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, Chuck, which group do you?
I work with the Mink One Center for Community Action. We're based in
Right.
Flushing, yeah, half of our house does direct service provision to mostly Asian immigrants in Queens, and then the other half does advocacy and organizing. So a lot of we do GOTV around elections. We do some tenant organizing, some housing organizing. We're trying to organize a lot more undocumented Koreans in Queens. So yeah.
That's a lot. Yeah, we don't have a big coverage in Queens. We kind of go to, I forgot where. There's a library. No, I can't remember. Forest Hills? Forest Hills? No.
That's their main branch. I think it's in Jamaica or Forest Hills.
Jamaica, yeah, but it's a small branch.
Oh, okay.
They're running a democracy for you. They started off Democracy 101 and they had 75 people show up for 7 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just like basic civics lessons, or it was
They talked about the structure of government, how the law was passed.
That's great.
How gerrymandering happens. That was an awesome one they did. They had a guy from Queens College, from the Taft Institute. He's funny, irreverent, and very knowledgeable.
That's a great combination for someone who's trying to teach you something. So
especially civics.
yeah, it's not always the most exciting.
Hello, everyone. So we will begin our webinar today. Welcome to our RiseOut Synergy Session GOTV 2020. My name is Aaron Sanders, and I am the Outreach and Organizing Coordinator at the LGBT Center here in New York City. My pronouns are he, him, and we are really excited for you all to join us for a special webinar, particularly as we unpack the importance of these upcoming elections. As many of you may know, we have an election coming up on June 23rd in New York State. And we hope that this webinar is insightful and informative as you all gear up to make your respective votes. So thanks again for joining us. A few housekeeping items to keep in mind. So this webinar is being recorded. We know that all of our community members may not be able to make it today. So in an effort to make this information readily accessible, this webinar will be recorded and uploaded to our LGBT Center YouTube channel. Related to that, all participants with the exception of the speaker will be muted. And this is because you want to give all of our presenters our undivided attention. And we also want to make sure that they have the concentration to get through their presentations. With that being said, there will be break for questions throughout the duration of the presentation. So if you have a question related to our Get Out the Vote campaign or for our speakers in general, feel free to ask the question using the chat function. And if you feel more comfortable speaking out your questions to our panelists, if you will, feel free to ping me and we will unmute you to ask your question. So yes, just keep that in mind. A word about RiseOut. So RiseOut is our advocacy initiative at the center. We partner with over 40 organizations throughout every region of New York State. And I will say that our coalition is very diverse in nature. To give you an example, we partner with organizations that are proponents of bail reform and criminal justice reform, but we also work with organizations who focuses on healthcare equity for trans-identifying people. Essentially, our partnerships run the gamut. And this is important because as we cultivate our platforms and as we make decisions, that diversity within our broader coalition allow us to thoughtfully make decisions and get perspectives from other groups that sort of run the gamut of LGBTQ identities. So RiseOut is our advocacy arm, and we've been in existence for a little over 3 years. Our initiative was born directly out of the 2017 elections. And we basically work to ensure that we are moving the needle on LGBTQ equity. And we also work with allied organizations such as the League of Women Voters and Minquan Community Center and NICET, who is helping us put this presentation together. So thank you. So without further ado, I would like to present our partners / co-sponsors. And these are the organizations and individuals who played a great deal in formulating this presentation. First, we have Chuck Park, who is the Civic Participation Manager at the Minquan Center for Community Action. Secondly, we have Trevon Mayers, Director of Policy and Community Outreach at the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Community Center, also referred to as the LGBT Center. We have Catherine Gray, President of the League of Women Voters, New York City chapter. And last but certainly not least, we have Rodman Serrano, Regional Coordinator at the Long Island Civic Engagement Table, which is an extension of the New York Civic Engagement Table. We want to thank you all for joining us today. Each one of the individuals will present about the work that they're doing within their respective organizations to bring about a vote for all of this. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Trevon Mayers.
Hey everyone, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Cool. Thank you for the introduction, Aaron. I wanted to start by just grounding the conversation on something that we talk about often, which is that voting matters. And I think that sometimes this is something that is hard to conceptualize for folks, especially in a place like New York. But what's interesting is that New York has historically had one of the lowest voter turnout rates in the country. So what that means is that in the 2016 presidential election, New York had the 8th worst voter turnout. And so one, it's important to recognize because it helps sort of inform what our outreach efforts look like. Our goal is really to continue to drive turnout among eligible voters. And to do that, we have to think really thoughtfully about messaging and framing and sort of like what motivates people to get to the polls in general. So a question that comes up often is, why don't people vote? And here are some of the things that we often hear. One, that there's not enough information, that there's so many candidates that it's hard to keep up. There's often misinformation about local government, so people not really understanding what local government does and how that impacts their daily lives. Also just general apathy about participating in the voting and electoral process, that comes up a lot. And then there are some New York specific things, like the fact that we're a very transient community and New Yorkers tend to move around a lot. In addition to that, there are strict voting laws. And a note about the last two bullets is that last year in 2019, advocates made a lot of progress on these items to make sure that voting was a little bit easier. So there is voter registration portability, so you don't have to re-register every time you move now. And there's also an early voting period in New York where folks have a few days before the election day to vote. And this helps alleviate just the general rush of folks waiting in line on one day. So these are helpful. And I think that all of these sort of correspond with the idea that if you make voting easier, then more people will participate. So what can we do? Our job collectively is really to just continue to combat misconceptions and general apathy. And to do that, we really want to make sure that people know how every election shapes their future. And so one of the things that we do at the center is really being the messenger, one, in terms of just like the foundation of understanding. I think that general civic engagement education is really important, because it allows people to sort of demystify what's happening in the electoral process and makes it more accessible for them to feel like their voice matters, to feel like their participation can bring about the future that they want to see. And I think that that's happening. So one of the things that I wanted to point out is that there is momentum that has been built already this year for LGBTQ voter participation. So we're seeing that participation, particularly in the primaries that have happened already, that voter turnout among LGBTQ voters is increasing pretty rapidly and to historic highs. So LGBTQ voters more than doubled from 2016 in early voting states. 9.4% of primary voters on Super Tuesday identified as LGBTQ. So what we really want to do is build this momentum. We know that this is something that folks are participating more. There's more information that's accessible about how to participate in the election process. And we want to just keep driving that point home. So I think to help spread the word, and something that we can all take away from this, is just messaging around voting is why voting is important in general. So 3 top line messages that we're encouraging folks to share is: 1, voting signals to politicians that you care about issues that matter to you. If you don't vote, it's hard for folks to really understand how folks are perceiving certain issues and how it directly impacts them. Your vote also ensures that the most vulnerable populations are heard and protected. So for folks that have limited resources, this is a way to make sure that you're speaking up about the type of changes that you want to see in your community. And lastly, elected officials can champion important LGBTQ rights. So before last year in 2019, New York State had not passed any LGBTQ affirming laws since 2011. So that means several years without the protections that we know are important to community members. And the only thing that changed that was making sure that there were elected officials in office that were champions for us, that championed LGBTQ rights and moved the needle on a more progressive agenda. So if you want to learn more, we have sort of like a curriculum called RiseOut Bootcamp. Really just has information about sort of like what it means to fill out a voter registration form, how you can participate in other GOTV efforts. So if you go to gaycenter.org/advocacy/get out the vote, you can learn more about how to get involved.
Thanks, Trevon. Does anyone have any questions for Trevon with respect to GOTV initiatives at the center, increase participation amongst LGBTQ people in the electoral process, or just any general questions for Trevon. If you feel more comfortable asking those questions in the chat function, feel free to do so, but also we can unmute you. Trevon, I have a question. So you mentioned that LGBTQ participation has nearly doubled this year as opposed to the 2016 elections and potentially 2018 elections as well. What would you attribute that to, and how can we continue that momentum?
That's a really good question. I think that there's lots of things that I can think about that may contribute to the surge that we're seeing in voter participation. But I do think that a large part of it just comes down to folks having the information that they need. So I think that sort of something that sort of like underscores a lot of these efforts is making sure that information is accessible. And I think that we just live in an age where it's just harder to make things any less visible. I think the news cycle and just all of community being more vocal and participating and sharing resources and information about what's happening is really informing people's decision to participate. And so that's something that I think is actually really exciting and something that I hope can continue.
Thanks, Trevon. Does anyone have one more question for Trevon? I unmuted everyone, so feel free to ask. If not, we can move on with our next presenter, but wanted to provide space for you to ask questions. And if you don't have a question now, that's fine. We'll have time at the end to answer any unanswered questions. And also feel free to use the chat throughout the duration of the presentation if you have a question as well. So with that being said, we will turn it over to Chuck Park, who does a lot of work regarding civic participation at the Minquan Center for Community Action. So without further ado, Chuck, take it away.
Thanks a lot, Aaron and Trayvon. Thank you guys and the center for hosting this panel today. It's really a pleasure to share this panel with Catherine from the League of Women Voters, Rodman from the Civic Engagement Table. A lot of our activities are powered by the New York Civic Engagement Table, so quick plug for them. Get in contact with them, they can help you. But really quickly, I'm Chuck Park. I'm the Civic Participation Manager at the Minquan Center for Community Action. We're based in Flushing. Since 1984, we've been serving, educating, and empowering immigrant New Yorkers with a particular focus on the Korean community in New York. Next slide, please. So our challenge in many ways is the same as many of the challenges that Trayvon highlighted in the center's presentation. You know, there's not enough information for voters. There are too many candidates to keep track of, especially in a year like 2020. They're really strict, kind of complicated processes and laws around how you participate. And all of that combined together leads to frustration and ultimately apathy and lack of participation. Now, layer on top of that things like linguistic barriers and cultural barriers, and it gets even harder to mobilize people who should be participating in the electoral process and just generally in civic life in New York and across the country. So the challenge for us, very specifically, as is written on the slide, is that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders participate at a much, much, much lower rate than the general public. I'm just looking at New York State for a moment. Based on the most recent census, we are 6.5% of the total eligible voter population. But of that, we make up only 4.4% of registered voters. So there are many of us who should be registering who don't. And then we get a few less, even less of us actually turn out to vote. So only 3.5% of us turned out to vote in 2018. Flipping those numbers a different way, overall turnout in 2018 for the general election, I think was just over 50%, 52%. AAPIs, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, turned out at 36%. So there's a lot of work to be done to educate and to mobilize Asian immigrant voters in this state and again across the country. Next slide, please. Oh, I think you skipped one. Go back one. Yeah, there we go. So this is our solution, which sounds really ambitious. First of all, what we do to address the cultural and linguistic barriers is we make sure that we're developing leaders in our own community. So all of Minkwon's staff and volunteers are immigrant New Yorkers or children of immigrant New Yorkers. And every single member of our staff speaks at least one of our community's languages. That's either Korean, Mandarin, or Cantonese at some level. And then multiple members of our staff speak an additional language beyond that. Many speak Spanish with some fluency. Some of them speak both Korean and Mandarin or Korean and Cantonese. So we make sure that we're recruiting from within the community, people who have an intimate knowledge of the daily lives and cultures of the people that we're trying to mobilize. The second thing we do is we think of civic participation as a continuous cycle. It's not just every 2 or every 4 years or every election day and a few weeks before that we're just activating, we're phone banking and door knocking. It's a constant cycle. So that includes everything from registering voters at our community meetings, making sure that we're going to courthouse naturalization ceremonies and handing voter registration forms in multiple languages to every single person there to get them to register on the spot. Then after people are registered, we collect their information, and with the help of partners like NICET, we stay in communication with the voters we registered. We send them either direct mail, kind of informing them about how to vote and key dates or key candidates for upcoming elections. And then finally, when it comes time to actually turn out and vote, whether it's for a primary or general election, hopefully we've already built some kind of relationship with this person. Maybe we registered them at the courthouse, then we sent them a postcard, or we texted them about some important race coming up. And then finally, a few weeks or a week before election day, we'll send them a final, text or a call or a knock on their door, not in this circumstance, but we'll contact them again, and they'll kind of already trust us and they'll turn out. And we found that to be pretty successful. I think our turnout, I think our differential is 3 to 4%. So the doors or the voters that we contact turn out at 3 to 4% higher rates than Asian Americans that we don't contact in New York. The third and last point is language access. So we make sure that, again, we provide all of our materials in multiple languages. So thankfully, thanks to the Voting Rights Act, we have voter registration applications in multiple languages already. And then New York City helpfully translates them into even additional languages that we make sure we have on hand, both at our office and at the ceremonies that we typically go to register voters. And then when we're producing educational materials, whether we're going to post them on our website or mail them, we make sure we translate them into, at a minimum, Korean and simplified Chinese, and if possible, also Bengali and additional languages. And then finally, when it comes to the GOTV kind of crunch time, we start with an English script, and then we make sure we translate that as well into at least Korean and Mandarin, and then if time and resources allow, additional languages, so that we're speaking to people on the phone in their native language. Because saying hello versus 안녕하세요 or another greeting in someone's native language means the difference between someone hanging up the phone on you or not responding to your text and having actual meaningful conversation about voting. So that's the solution. We found, again, that's been pretty effective. 2020, that's read my mind. 2020 has particular challenges, right? Given the public health crisis that we're going through, as well as particularly for I guess our Asian community, just a heightened fear of going out. There's reported surge in anti-Asian xenophobia, maybe anti-Asian incidents of violence. And so for our particular community that we're trying to activate, they're afraid of going out in public, not just because they might get sick, but also because they might get yelled at or attacked. In addition, many of our community members have never voted by absentee ballot before, and doing so requires a couple of extra steps, right? I mean, we're all gonna be mailed the ballot application, hopefully in multiple languages, but you'll still have to fill it out, you have to mail it back. Then you have to wait to receive the actual ballot. You have to fill it out again. So there are a lot more forms involved, a lot more reading, a lot more kind of bureaucracy involved, a lot more friction to this process than in a typical election year. You know, it's in many ways, it's actually a lot easier just to show up at a poll and vote than to vote by absentee ballot. And then finally, given the extraordinary public health and economic situation, many of our organizations are facing kind of reduced human resources and financial resources, right? You know, many of our staff can't work, or they can't work as much or as effectively as they normally do. And, you know, many of our traditional funding streams, you know, grants or other kind of pockets of money that we use to fuel our activities are dwindling really quickly, right? Because everyone's feeling this pain. So that's a serious challenge for this cycle. And in solutions, you know, I'm hoping to hear some good ideas on this call. You know, obviously more education is great. Using all the remote tools that we have, I think is the path forward. You know, we can phone bank, we can text bank, and we can use social media. And what Minkwon's trying really hard to do is use a lot more kind of analog old school stuff, things like direct mail and traditional media, especially ethnic media. So, you know, we'll mail out voter guides, again, in multiple languages, as well as candidate surveys in multiple languages. And then we'll push hard in you know, Korean language newspapers and radio shows, and if possible, Chinese language newspapers, you know, radio shows, cable news. But I'm really interested to hear what other folks on the panel or other people watching, you know, what their ideas are as well, because, you know, this is a problem I think that many of us share.
Thanks, Chuck. That was really informative, and it's great to hear about the great mobilization efforts that you all are that's happening in Queens and further. Is there any questions for Chuck? And keep in mind, if questions arise, you can type them in the chat, or you could also pose them towards the end of the conversation. One question that I had for you, Chuck, if you haven't interfaced with the Minkwon Center before, and you need, say, a voter registration guide in Korean, how would you go about requesting that?
That's a great question. So yeah, our distribution is usually to our community members first and foremost. And so we have kind of lists of that. And then we also post our stuff on our website. So I guess if you really need if you have a Korean neighbor or something who needs to understand the issues or the candidates, then you can go on our website and it'll be posted there. And then really helpfully, we use tools like the van to reach out beyond our own engagement lists, you know, people who have already engaged with us to identify voters who are, you know, likely Korean speaking, and create mailing lists. And so hopefully we're reaching people before they have to reach out to us. But the easiest way, if someone asks you, you know, where can I get the Korean language voter guide? It hasn't been produced yet, by the way, but it will be soon. If they need it, they can go to our website. Yeah.
Thanks, Chuck. So if you have any questions for Chuck or Trevon, feel free to write them in the chat, and we'll make sure that they get addressed before the conclusion of this presentation. Now we will segue into our next presentation, which focuses on youth voter engagement by Rodman Serrano of the New York Civic Engagement Table. So Rodman, take it away.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, no, thanks Aaron, and thanks Trevon for inviting us, for just like a really great opportunity. Thanks Chuck for the shout out. We love working with the Minkwon Center and all of the other groups here. So it's awesome to, you know, be able to, you know, share this space together. And yeah, so let's get started. So yeah, my name is Rodman Serrano. I am the Long Island Regional Coordinator for the New York Civic Engagement Table. And the topic for my conversation today is youth voter engagement, which we all know is a very important issue this year, right? But just like very briefly, you know, the New York Civic Engagement Table is a coalition organization that works with more than 60 nonprofit organizations across New York on, you know, issues of voting rights, voter mobilization, census, and predominantly with communities of color, low-income communities, and also with young people. And the way that I got started in any of this work was through a youth leadership program that we host every year on Long Island, where I was able to work alongside, some amazing people, some amazing young people, and going out to my community to register people to vote. And it was like my first experience actually doing any organizing and, learning about what civic engagement was, because before I didn't really know what it was. And so just a very transformative experience. And so, yeah, and so I just wanted to kind of start off by just like giving some context of, why we're talking about youth voter engagement and why we think it's such an important issue. And if you can just maybe go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so the numbers, right? So so like nationally, there are many challenges when it comes to voter registration and turnout. And we know that this issue is that it intensifies when it comes to young people. A key thing that we wanted to highlight here is that there are 47 million young people who are between the ages of 18 and 30 who are citizens, right? They're voting eligible young people, which is a large amount. And of this number, there are 20 million who are young people of color, right? So this is like a large part of the electorate, but it's also like one of the most diverse generations ever. Right, so that's something that we have to like really take into consideration when we're when we're doing our get out the vote work, when we're talking about the issues, is knowing who we're speaking with, right? When we break this number down even a bit further, like down to New York, the youth citizen population between the ages of 18 and 24 is over 3 million young people, which again is a lot of people, right? But when we break that number even down a little bit more, only 61% of young people between the ages of 18 and 29 are actually registered to vote. And even further down, right, only 16% of the young people actually voted in the midterm elections in 2018. Right, so it's even though there are like over 3 million young people who are actually able to register to vote, only 16% of them actually turned out to vote in 2018. And we know that in 2018, the elections were also very critical, right? We had, so many different elections at the state and local, federal level as well, but only 16% of them actually registered to vote. And so in New York State, we have like a lot of work that we have to do to make sure that young people have the information, like the tools that they need to actually be able to like fully participate in their communities. And yeah, and cool. And then, so yeah, some of the barriers, right? Like, from my personal experience, I know that I've heard a lot of people say, well, young people don't want to vote because they just don't care, or, they are just apathetic, or, they're not really affected by the issues. And so I just wanted to take kind of a little bit of time just to kind of like challenge that notion, and kind of quickly go over some of like the systemic barriers that actually makes voter participation challenging. In New York, we are far behind so many other states when it comes to our voter registration system. So for example, we do not have automatic voter registration, right? And also in like many other states, we also do not have same day voter registration, and we also are not allowed to vote by mail, right? These are things that would actually make voting a lot easier. Furthermore, for many, the communities where we work in, our schools have been severely underfunded, right? So when we're talking about civics education, right, like, the way that we are taught government and politics in high school does not really resonate, with our communities. And, it does not really help inform us, like, what can I do as a young person to really help have an impact to really like have an impact on what's going on in my daily life, in my family's life. And next, right, we have another issue is that we also have candidates, you know, who run for office who do not prioritize reaching out to young people and infrequent voters. And this is like a huge issue because like one of the things that we hear a lot when we're out in the field is that, you know, a lot of young people feel like, you know, that feel very uncomfortable or maybe not confident about voting because they don't know where the politicians stand on the issues that they care about. So for a lot of them, it's like, you know, why am I going to go out and vote for a person who I don't really even know what they stand for, right? Why should I do that? If, you know, for a person who's not, you know, a politician who's not even coming to my door to talk to me, you know, why should I vote for them? So we need to encourage and actually, you know, we need to actually maybe fill in that gap. We need to be the ones who are actually going out to talk to young people, knocking on their doors, texting them, right? Making phone calls. We need to reach out to these, you know, young people to encourage them and, you know, really help talk to them about the issues. And lastly, community conditions, you know, they matter. We are living in very unprecedented times that are very challenging. And it's not to say that, you know, there weren't any challenging issues before, you know, this current pandemic, but a lot of the issues that are affecting, you know, our families, are affecting a lot of youth, a lot of students, are intensifying even now. So it's very important when we're talking to people, when we're trying to encourage them to register to vote, or whether to get counted in the census or to go out and vote. We need to talk to them about the issues that, you know, that are really affecting them, that are really impacting them, and connect that to, you know, getting civically engaged. And yeah, and so what are we doing about it, right? So for a long time, our organizations have been, you know, very committed to youth-centered civic engagement programs. Here on Long Island, we've developed a youth leadership pipeline program that kicks off in the beginning part of the year. And through this program, we work with Long Island-based youth, you know, through trainings that explores worldview, and also, you know, diving deep into government, social justice movements, and also, like, you know, just also highlighting. I think one thing that's also very important is, like, you know, through these trainings, we also highlight the role that young people, especially in particular young people of color, have had in mobilizing themselves, right? Being at the forefront of like a lot of social justice movements, right? When we're talking about, you know, immigration reform or criminal justice reform or improving our education system or climate change, right? These are a lot of these movements have been, you know, led by young people, and they're continuing to be led by young people. And oftentimes, you know, during these trainings, one thing that we hear a lot is, like, you know, the young people would, you know, say, like, you know, I was never taught this history, you know, in high school. I never, you know, really learned about, you know, all of these, you know, incredible movements that were, you know, really spearheaded by young people, right? Who, you know, who were my age or who look like me. And I think this is like a message that's very important to get across. And yeah, and so, and this program, you know, leads us into the summer portion of our work, where we do a lot of voter registration. And our voter registration work is led by, you know, young people that we recruit, right, in the communities that we work in. We train them, they participate in trainings, leadership development projects, but they take all of this knowledge, right, that they learn, and they go out into the community, and they're talking to, you know, their neighbors, they're talking to, you know, students on their college campuses, registering them to vote. And I think it's a very important, you know, tactic, right, you know, to have young people from the community doing this work, right? When you're having young people who look like you, who go to your same, you know, the same school that you do, who live in your community, right? It's going to be a lot more impactful, especially when you're talking about, you know, some issues that are, you know, very important to, you know, a lot of youth and a lot of students. And in the fall, we do get out the vote work, and so we create, you know, volunteer opportunities for, you know, our young people. So they help to lead our texting programs, our phone banking, and they actually, you know, go out to knock on doors in the neighborhoods where they live to really help motivate, you know, their neighbors, their peers to go out and vote. And yeah, and also, and the last thing basically is, you know, again, we are living in very like difficult times, right? We had like, but this is also a very critical year, right? The work that we're doing cannot stop, even though we're not allowed to really do, any face-to-face, person-to-person contact, really. So we have developed a 9-month youth fellowship program where we're going to be working with young people, and actually included a tiny little a screenshot from 4 of our amazing youth fellows, right, on the bottom right of the screen. And so the program started less than a week ago, and they've already made hundreds of phone calls, right? And, encouraging community members to get counted in the census, checking in on how community members are doing as well, right? Because we know that there's a lot of people who are suffering, but these are going to be the young people who are going to be, really helping to have an impact in what's going on Long Island. They're going to be helping to lead our Get Out the Vote work. They're going to be doing a lot of work around the new voting reforms that are going to be taking place very soon, right? So making sure that everyone knows about the new absentee ballot expansions. But it's very important that, it's young people who are helping to do this work, and we're super excited to be able to work with them. And yeah, so that's pretty much what we're doing, right? Tackling not only the voter engagement component, but also when it comes to these larger issues, whether it's like education or voting reforms, making sure that young people have a voice in these topics. And thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Rodman. That's really informative, and it's great to hear about all the youth engagement work that's happening out in Long Island. Does anyone have a question for Rodman about NISET, the Long Island youth engagement work, or general questions about programming happening there?
Yeah, this is Chuck from the Minkwon Center. Thanks for that awesome presentation, Rodman. I'm wondering what some strategies that what strategies have you found successful in registering new young voters in the current circumstances? So, our bread and butter was big community events, or again, going to big naturalization ceremonies and just registering, dozens, if not, 100+ people all at once. And we obviously can't do that anymore. And so we're finding it hard to actually expand that, that pool of people. So, have you had any success in kind of identifying and registering new young voters?
Thanks. Yes, it's very similar. We started off the year, very strong and, doing a lot of voter registration events at high schools, large gatherings, but it had to stop, right? And so our voter registration plans have been, really affected by what's going on. And although we're still exploring different tactics, different ways that we could still make sure that, community members know about how they can register to vote. Even though New York State's a bit harder, right? Because we don't have like a really good online voter registration, system. I think one thing that we're going to be exploring a little bit more is like relational organizing, right? How can we encourage, young people, some of the volunteers that we work with to be the ones who are, texting or reaching out to their community members or family members about registering to vote. And I know that there are a lot of really cool relational organizing tools like Empower and a few others that folks can kind of check out. But it's something that we're still exploring and that we are going to be thinking about a little bit more as we move more into the summer. Thanks.
Aaron, I think you're muted.
Oh, yep, sorry. So this is just one last question from me. So Rodman, it's great to hear about the youth engagement work that's happening in Long Island. I'm wondering, does the youth engagement work happen in cohorts? Is it like a rolling sort of a mission? I'm just wondering for community members who might be interested in participating on a deeper level
Yeah. So we do have different cohorts. The trainings that I mentioned that take place in the beginning part of the year, we do a lot of recruitment, right, from at high schools, colleges, and it's that cohort really that we select our fellows from our summer program. The fellows that we currently have right now come from those trainings, right? And so far we've hosted, over like 2,000, right, of, we have youth members, right, who are a part of these trainings, that even if some of them can't be a part of our, our voter registration programs, our fellowship programs, it's really creating, year-round opportunities where they can still get involved.
Awesome. That's really great to hear. And Ryman, thank you for giving us that information, and hopefully our participants find that helpful and they could relay that information to the young people in which they serve. So thank you.
Thanks.
So next we will have the final segment of our presentation by Catherine Gray, who is the president of the League of Women Voters, where she actively engages women and other communities to make sure that everyone is involved in elections. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Kathy.
So who is the League of Women Voters? Well, we're 100 years old, my hair. We're a nonpartisan political organization. That means we don't support parties or candidates. We're a membership organization, and we're focused on informed and active participation in government. And as it's been constantly said, we have a problem because civics isn't being taught in schools. People don't realize who is in charge of what. The president isn't in charge of your garbage. The local government is, and people go out for the presidential and never don't vote as high in numbers as for local elections. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues. We have a speakers bureau, we produce pamphlets, etc. And we do it through education, advocacy, and eventually lobbying. Next slide. So why bother to vote? Some elections are decided by razor-thin margins. Every vote matters. If people from the city will remember the Queens district attorney race, where it was counted about 5 times. And each time they counted, they got a different winner. And then eventually the winner was won by 200 votes. So your vote works. Try to focus on what the community wants. So like I picked garbage here, but if you have school kids, you talk about price of education, access to grants and loans. But here for garbage is like, are you happy with it? Are you happy with your ability to get a good college education? So the decisions are made on those various topics by the activity of voters in a neighborhood. Less voter turnout equals less service. So if your community doesn't vote, then the schools in your neighborhood don't get the concentration of the politician who wants to keep going. So voting helps with healthcare, schools, and civil rights. Now, Aaron and Trayvon are working on a whole list of New York State Senate and Assembly bills that affect the community, and providing information on those topics and the people that support them. So that is a really important service. Next slide. Who can register to vote? Citizens of the United States. 16 and 17-year-olds can pre-register to vote if they are, and vote only when they're 18. This is one of the new laws that were passed 2 years ago to improve the voting system here. They were like 9 different voting laws that were changed in January. You have to live in New York State for 30 days before the election. You can't be in prison for a felony conviction or on parole unless your voting rights have been restored. You can't claim a right to vote anywhere else, and that affects people that have 2 homes. You can't vote in New York City and the Hamptons. And not determined to vote by, determined by a court to be mentally ill. And that's very rare. Next slide. The special populations that need to be registered are college students. They can choose to register in where their family lives, or they can register where their dorm is. So if you live in Brooklyn, go to school in Buffalo, you can vote in Buffalo. If you live in New York City, you can vote and go to school in Pennsylvania, you could vote in Pennsylvania. The homeless are another interesting population. They can vote. They can put down an intersection, a park bench, or wherever, but they must have a place where they receive mail. So like a soup kitchen, a church, their family members, as long as they can get the mail from the Board of Elections, then their registration is put together. And domestic abuse victims. Because the voter rolls are public information, they can register without disclosing their address, and they can vote in person in their local BOE, not their local poll site, so that they can be free of fear, hopefully. Next slide. The big change that happened, the problem is everything about the voting right now is in such flux. Every day there's something new happening. So right now during the COVID, anybody can declare a temporary illness on the absentee application and get a ballot, or they can wait for their ballot to come. Their application, not their ballot, the application for the absentee ballot. Because as Chuck said, it's many layers of paper and envelopes and postage that absentee ballot voting takes. The other reasons you can vote absentee, you're out of town, in jail waiting trial, because if you're not convicted, you can vote. You're incarcerated for a misdemeanor, you can vote, or you're ill or disabled. But as now, we check the box temporary illness, and then you will be able to get a ballot in the mail. Next slide. The big thing that bothers me is that turns off new voters. They come in and they say, the poll worker says, you're not in the book, you can't vote. And that really deters people from coming back. But everybody who believes that they're eligible to vote can vote on an affidavit ballot. And don't leave the polls without voting. This is so important because some poll worker, I'm a poll worker, but some poll workers don't offer the affidavit ballots. You have to ask for it. Okay, next slide. And the affidavit ballot, the absentee ballot, all depends on your correct information at the BOE in New York State. They have all the records. And to make sure that you're registered in the right party, and that they have the right address for you, use voter lookup. That's a really powerful site. You can look up to see when you registered, what address you are. Since we talked about how movable we are, we move around a lot. It will tell you which party. If you're registered as an independent, you will not get an application for an absentee ballot for the June election. It is only for parties that, only the parties that are running primaries, and it's basically Democrat, Republican, some places working family. So voter lookup is very powerful. You really need to check to make sure your registration is there and correct. The other tools, if you're going to vote in person, a poll site locator is vital. It tells you where your early voting polling site will be in New York City and where your regular poll site. And the Board of Election does change the poll sites in year to year. So you can't count on that. I voted last year at this place and I'm going to vote again, but the poll site locator. And everybody was talking about not knowing who the candidates were, how to find information. So the League of Women Voters has this program called Vote 411. You get the candidates, they answer a list of questions that we've asked, and then you get this, each candidate answering the question. So you could see if the person that you're thinking about voting feels the same way on the issue as you do. To see your ballot, you can go to Ballotpedia for New York State and you get a sample ballot. So you can see what it's going to look like. It's not a surprise anymore. Columbia University has, for New York City, who's on my ballot. And that also helps you with information. I forgot to put on this slide, in New York City, the Campaign Finance Board puts out a pamphlet. They also have video conversations with the candidates, so you can also look and see how they stand on various issues. And to find out who represents you right now, you go to mygov.nyc.com. I'm sort of centric here in New York City. That will also tell you who they are, where their telephones are, where their email is, where their address is, and visiting your representative to talk about issues that you are concerned about brings it up to the point of knowledge for their staff. And some staffers said, if you get 10 people asking about the same issue, then it becomes an issue for the office. If only 1 or 2 people talk about an issue, it's not taken as seriously as if the 10 people came in and talked about it. So thank you again. Any questions? I know the laws have been changing all over the place, and who can use the absentee ballot, who's going to be on the ballot. In New York City, we don't have a presidential election, and we don't have our special elections for the Queens Borough President and the 2 seats. So there's also a seat upstate that had a special election that's been canceled. But the rest of it for state and assembly and House of Representatives are still on the ballot. And this is a very important election because it also determines how maybe the redistricting lines will happen. If you like our gerrymandering system or don't like it, you might be able to change it or keep it by the way you vote.
Thanks, Kathy. That was really informative, and it's wonderful to hear about the great mobilization efforts that is happening at the League for Women Voters. And thank you for going over those procedural changes. Are there any questions for Kathy? I know I have one. So Kathy, there's a rumor that's going around that voters can upload their absentee ballots electronically.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yes, I've had that on my paper. Yes, that happened this week. You can register for your absentee ballot online and mail it to. You have to mail it to your Board of Elections. Each board has a different address where you send it to, but in New York City, it's absentee, capital A, absentee, capital J for June 2020 at BOE NYC. That's the first thing that the Board of Elections, other than has been able to do electronically. The only way you can register to vote electronically is using your driver's license or your state ID. Maybe upstate is not such a problem, but in the city it is, because a lot of people don't have driver's license. Thank you for the question. Totally forgot about it.
Thank you, Kathy. That's really helpful. Does anyone have any questions for Kathy or any of our other speakers who spoke today? We have about 4 minutes remaining. I just want to open up the floor to all our community members who are on this call. Well, if you don't have any questions at the time, feel free to stay connected with us. So we're constantly contacting community members about the importance of census and the elections. And the best way to stay involved, as we are all social distancing, is by signing up for our text message alert. So you could text the word RiseOut, one word, RiseOut, to the number 698-666. Again, that's you can text RiseOut, one word, to 698-66, and you will get occasional updates about webinars like this, reminders to vote, and just general information that we think it's helpful. And we want to thank you all for joining, because you are the reason why these webinars and these activations can happen. And this work will not be successful without you. So we hope that you found today informative, and this presentation will be uploaded to the Center's YouTube channel. So you can feel free to revisit it in a few days and share it with community members. But we hope you all turn out for the election. And if you can't do so physically, we strongly encourage you to request an absentee ballot. That way you can ensure that your voice is heard. So again, thank you all for attending, and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Yeah, Aaron, before
Yes.
you leave, hi, this is Janice. Catherine, is there any way that you can post your sites again that you mentioned